Well, hi everyone, and welcome to today's seminar hosted by the International Inequalities Institute at the LSE. My name is Pablo, and I'm a research officer at the III. So I'm incredibly pleased to be chairing today's seminar titled More Unequal or Not as Rich, Dilemmas over Distributional National Accounts for Latin America, which is part of the III's Inequalities seminar series. Today's speaker is Marc Morgan. Marc Morgan is a researcher and teaching fellow at the Department of History, Economics and Society at the Paul Bairoch Institute of Economic History at the University of Geneva. He's also a research fellow of the World Inequality Lab in the Paris School of Economics. May I ask our online audience to please keep yourselves muted? As usual, there will be the chance for you to pose questions to the speaker following the presentation. We will take questions from both in-person and online audience. I will now hand over to Marc. Many thanks, Pablo, and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Thank you to the Institute for the invitation, and apologies for not being there in person. This week I've got a few conference presentations and I've had to move some virtually, so thank you for accepting. So it's exciting to present this work to you. As Pedro said, it's titled More Unequal or Not as Rich, Dilemmas over Distributional National Accounts for Latin America. And this is work that has been going on for some time. So I've been 2.5 years in Geneva. But this work started in my previous position at the World Inequality Lab in the Paris School of Economics. And it looks like finally it's drawing to a close. So the research papers that this presentation is based on are at a revised and resubmit stage. And we're also drawing to a close certain country government collaborations with the UN in Latin America that I'll talk more about. Okay, but just to kick things off, and do let me know if the sound is not good. Just to kick things off, I would like to just start with some basics around the inequality or the growth that we seek to measure, and 3 questions around this. So very basic stuff, like the inequality of what? So the definition of income in this question is key. So what income are we talking about? What income, type of income are we interested in? And there are many variations of income, and this is going to be very important for the remainder of the presentation. We can think about income that is pre-tax, income that is already net of tax, surveyed income, tax declared income, or macro income in the national accounts. Okay, so that's the first key question. What type of income are we interested in relation to inequality measurement? Then we also have inequality between whom? This concerns the unit of observation. So do we care about measuring inequality among individuals, tax units as they appear on tax declarations, or households, and how to divide up households individually, per capita, per adult, equivalized scales? There's many options here. And lastly, the third key question is inequality from what indicator? So when you decide on your income, you decide on your unit of observation, what statistical indicator are you going to use to estimate the distribution of income, or to show it? The Gini coefficient is a very common measure that we all know. Income shares have also been growingly popular over time. Now, the key point here is, well, what's the purpose of your study? And depending on what you want to study, your answers to these 3 questions will probably vary. Okay, and this is the starting point, and it's something we'll come back to at the end of this presentation. So it's omnipresent, is this starting point, these 3 questions. Now, if we're interested in income and income inequality, there are 3 main data sources that we typically use, right? At a micro level, there are household surveys, there are administrative tax records, and at the macro level, there's a system of national accounts. So I'm sure many of you are aware and have worked with these different types of data. Just very briefly, household surveys, they measure responses on a whole lot of different questions. So individual questionnaires are sent out to households like this one. This is an example of the case of Brazil, where they're asking about the characteristics of the household, occupations, income that is self-declared, and a host of socio-demographic variables. Okay, but the key point here is that it's voluntary. And by being a voluntary sample of a population, typically, 1% of the population is surveyed or sampled, this will affect the type of information that's gathered, especially with regards to sensitive questions like income. There can be a whole lot of biases that the literature has studied in detail. But it has some great advantages as well in terms of the richness of the socio-demographic variables that are captured. At a micro level, at an individual level, we also have administrative tax records, as I said. Now, here we have the type of income that is covered is the one that's legally taxable. It also can include formal wages. So if you're just looking at social security records and you look at the formal wages, the pay, social contributions at source, you have information on tax paid and different types of information that are available. So this here is an example of Brazilian income tax declarations, where you can see by a bracket of income, the number of people that have declared such income and the level of this income, along with a whole lot of other information to do with deductions. Okay, so this is the typical format of tax declarations. And of course, they cover the universe of taxpayers, shall we say. And in developing countries, this proportion of the population that's included in this data source is typically less than in developed, given the larger size of the informal market. So here in Latin America, it can vary between 5% of the population or 20% of the population that is covered in income tax statistics. Okay, but here the key difference is that it's obligatory, or that is that there are fines, there are penalties for not declaring accurately the income. But as the literature also has shown, there can be evasion, and there is evasion in many countries. So at least we think that this is a lower bound for incomes nearer the top of the distribution, especially in developing regions. And thirdly, the system of national accounts. So this is macro income, as you know, so GDP statistics, gross national income, GNI statistics, total profits and wages of the national economy, mixed income, all taxes and spending, savings and investment come from the system of national accounts, but they are aggregate data. So that is, they just present the aggregates. From this, we can get an idea of average income of the national economy, GDP per capita, etc. Okay, and this is the type of format that we have, just aggregate figures for all these different categories. And importantly, the national accounts are decomposed according to institutional sector. So you have corporate income, you have household income, you have government income, and these accounts are set up so that the production account, the sum of value added, equates to the sum of total spending in the economy and total income that is received. Obviously, with some discrepancies, as we know. Okay, but this is the official data for countries' GDP statistics, etc. So what I'm going to explain here is what we do and why we do it, what we find and where does it leave us. Okay, what lessons can we draw? So what do we do and why? This is an ongoing collective project. As I said, it's drawing to an end. It's a collective project where we have an agreement with the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America, the ICLAC, or CIPAL in the Spanish acronym, whereby it's a collaboration of data sharing and methodological sharing across the institutions, so across ourselves in our university positions and the UN ICLAC, with some agreements with country governments. So here, you see the first two research papers are research papers we wrote in collaboration with access to certain data from ICLAC. And we've also collaborated with governments, in this case, the government of the Dominican Republic, to produce this type of a study with what I'm going to present here, an overview. And we also have ongoing agreements with the governments of Costa Rica and Colombia. And here's a photograph of the first meeting that we had in October in Cebal in Santiago in Chile, whereby we were there with members of government agencies, statistical agencies, central banks, who also are in charge to produce macro consistent distributional indicators. And I'll get into details of what I mean by that. But there is an international agenda out there that these countries in the region are participating in, led by the UN and the OECD, to update national official statistics and macro statistics so that we can have inequality statistics that are consistent with macro growth. That is the idea. And so a bit more context on this. So, there's a system of national accounts. I just, presented a brief overview of what they look like. But the development of macroeconomic statistics has gone through various revisions over the decades. So starting with the first homogenized standards for the system of national accounts in 1953, and various revisions that have happened over time up until the most recent the manual or guidelines that we have, which are from 2008, that just basically define what the production frontier is, what gets counted as production and what enters thus GDP and national income, etc. And we know that in 2025, there's a new revision that's due for the system of national accounts that is currently under construction. And if you go onto the website of the United Nations, you will see you can filter through the chapters and the index, and you can see here the chapter 34. One of the novelties are chapters 34 and 35. But for what interests us today, chapter 34 is interesting, a new chapter called Measuring Wellbeing. And within this chapter, there's an important section, which is here detailed on the right, called Distributions of Household Income, Consumption and Wealth. Okay, these are documents that are accessible to the public, and you can consult them to see how they are working towards distributing household income, consumption, and wealth, distributing the aggregates as they appear in the national accounts. Okay, and this also has a long history, going right back to the very beginning of the birth of the national accounts. So most famously in the US, perhaps, with Simon Kuznets and the work of the National Bureau of Economic Research, who were at the same time measuring total national income and its distribution across different groups. And in terms of other important institutional initiatives, you can go right to the present and finish at the OECD handbook, which was just published this January, so a month ago, on the compilation of household distributional results consistent with the national accounts totals, okay, which is part of this project and what will feed, we can imagine, the new SNA guidelines for 2025. Okay. In terms of academic initiatives, in parallel, we can draw on the work, and here I'm drawing on the work that I've participated in at the World Inequality Lab at Paris School of Economics, which houses the World Inequality Database, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which subsumed the early World Top Incomes Database, which, if you remember from the mid-2000s, it came online with estimates of top incomes from tax data for a number of countries. But now the World Inequality Database has gone beyond the top and focused on the whole distribution for the whole population. And here are the guidelines that we co-wrote to get a sense of how to do so. In terms of Latin America, what's interesting is that you'd think that these initiatives are especially focused or drawing lessons from what was done in rich countries like the US and other countries. But what is interesting, if you look historically in Latin America, it was actually a tradition that was very present already from the very beginning of the construction of national accounts, or getting an idea of estimates of national income. Here to draw some examples. So, for example, the Brazilian National Statistics Agency, the IBGE, in the 1960 census, it was the first census to include questions on income. And that was repeated in the census of 1970. That was analyzed in a very heated debate in the early 1970s during the military dictatorship to get a sense of what happened to Brazilian inequality during the 1960s. The National Development Agency in Argentina, CONAGE, in 1965, interestingly, it tried to estimate the distribution in Argentina in these years, combining sources that were reconciled with the system of national accounts. And we get to very influential work later with Oscar Altimir, who was a researcher at the UNIGE, who produced a number of studies, the most influential from 1987, where he analyzed the gaps between micro incomes in surveys and census data and to macro incomes in the system of national accounts, and proposed an adjustment method to adjust these micro incomes so that they're scaled to their macro totals. And this proposed methodology was adopted by ECLAC in its official estimates of inequality on its database until 2017, when the initiative was abandoned due to the complexity of the method, due to challenges regarding the data, and just the size of the gaps were becoming too large to really handle. Okay. Now, what do we do in this project is we revisit this tradition in Latin America with new data and methods, because especially in the context of this international agenda that is moving towards these distributional national accounts. Okay, so we offer a finer comparison of incomes from different data sources, a whole range of different data, micro and macro data sources. And we propose a new reconciliation of micro and macro data gaps. So that is what we do. Now, why the comparison of incomes? And here I'm drawing a picture, this case of Brazil. And I call this a distributional enigma. Because here you have the division of, here you have gross national income divided into three shades or components. So the part of gross national income, that's households, the household sector, the corporate sector, and the general government sector. And here plotted are the total income that is reported in the household survey and total income that is reported on tax declarations. Okay, and you can see a number of things. You can see that the household sector accounts for about 70% of overall national income of the national economy. The government is about 10%. And the total income that's reported in surveys is about half of total national income. It's about 70% of household macro income, the blue area. And the total income that's reported on tax declarations in the case of Brazil, it's about the same as what's reported in the survey, which also tells us something, because we know that in the case of Brazil, only 15% of the population file a tax declaration. So there's 15% of the population compared to 100% of the population in the survey, where total income declared is the same. So already here we're getting a sense that there is something off, even between the microdata themselves. And when you're comparing these microdata, so these the dotted lines and the triangular lines to the overall macro data, you can see that there are gaps. So that's a first picture. Okay, we need to investigate this a bit more. And when we take other countries, we find similar results in the gaps between microdata and macro data, and even between the microdata. So again, we have a varied proportion of the population that's included in tax data. But the takeaway is that about half of national income is reported in surveys, which for decades were the main source to study income inequality questions. And so we want to dig a bit deeper. So here we want to say, okay, how can we understand these gaps a bit better? And here I'm reproducing the image for Brazil on the left. And basically you can see that on the left, as to summarize, half of national income is covered in surveys. So the survey dotted line is about half or trending less than a half. And on the right, so this is the blue bar. The blue bar is the percentage of national income that's covered in the survey. And so the rest is the gap. But of course, to understand a bit better what type of gap this is, we can decompose into what we call a measurement gap and a conceptual gap. That is, the conceptual gap is the part of the overall gap that is due to conceptual differences. Differences in definitions. So there's income in the survey. There's income in the national accounts that by definition is not captured in the survey. It's a different type of income. So the red part, the darker red part of the gap here is the measurement gap. So when we're comparing like for like, we're comparing apples with apples to the best possible way. And so here you can see that the measurement gap when we're comparing income like for like in the surveys and the macro data and the national accounts is quite significant. And then we can ask, well, what's within this red shaded area, what's responsible for this gap? And this is where we can go to decompose into different incomes at the individual level and see, well, how is this measurement gap decomposed? And here you have the picture on the right, whereby you can see that, the 50% gap or the close to the 40% gap, you can see that it's composed. It's wages are responsible, pensions and benefits in green, and property income, which is significant, as we'll see. So this is the overall distribution of gaps. So here we can get a better idea of what incomes are responsible for this measurement gap. And just to give you a better sense, this is probably a clearer picture where if we're taking these individual incomes in the survey, the amounts that are declared, and we compare them to the amounts that are declared, that are reported in the national accounts, these are the ratios. So for example, you can see that at the very bottom are capital incomes. That is the total amount of capital income that's reported in surveys is barely 10% of the total amount that's received by households, or that's reported to be received by households in the national accounts that feed GDP statistics and national income statistics. Okay, so you can see overall there's not a perfect match. There never is. Typically, labor incomes are better covered in surveys, and mixed income can be very volatile just by the nature of how it's reported in surveys. Importantly, obviously, in a survey, there's a reference period whereby we just have access to information that covers a month. So generally, households report their incomes over a month, and so we have to annualize it in some way. So if mixed income is very volatile. It's not received to the same extent every month. Here we seem to be overshooting, or when we multiply by 12 for Brazil, the end result is that the figure is even greater than the mixed income reported in national accounts. So there are challenges on both sides, but here the takeaway is that capital incomes are very absent in the survey, unsurprisingly, as you may know. So given these gaps between the different macro data sets, we propose a reconciliation in 4 steps, which brings forth 4 distributions, or results in 4 distributions. So first of all, we have the distribution of income in surveys. So we have to estimate the distribution of income in the raw surveys. And here we use the ECLAC harmonized database, where we have the annual surveys from 2000. Okay, very straightforward. These are micro data. Okay, very straightforward to estimate the distribution of the income reported there, pre-tax, before taking into account tax or transfers. And we know that the survey is, from the literature and the work that many people have done, survey does have problems accurately capturing incomes at the top. So what do we do for each country with available tax data? We reweight the survey using a methodology that's detailed in this joint work here with Thomas Blanchet and Ignacio Flores, The Weight of the Rich, published in the Journal of Economic Inequality. This is a new reweighting methodology. So we use this methodology to reweight the survey with available tax data for our group of 10 or 11 Latin American economies. The third step is we scale these incomes, so in the reweighted survey, to their equivalent household level income in the national accounts. And we do the scaling proportionally by type of income, right? So we do it proportionally for wages, pensions, mixed income, imputed rent, and property income. What are these scaling factors? They're basically 1 divided by this, each of these, okay? So you can see that if capital incomes only cover 20% of their equivalent in national accounts, we're going to be multiplying by 5 the capital incomes that we observe in the survey at the individual level, etc. And fourth, we think it's interesting to do this thought experiment, to go beyond the household sector in macro data and distribute all income so that we arrive at net national income of the total economy. This means distributing corporate and government income from the SNA. And essentially, this is distributing undistributed profits, which we impute them to the employers and receivers of dividends in our micro data. And other income, we just do it proportionally. Okay, so here you can see that after the first 3 steps, we arrive at what we can call pre-tax household sector income. Okay, this exactly matches household sector income from the national accounts. Step 4, we arrive at pre-tax national income for the total economy. Okay, and this difference will matter. And now, what about the impact of taxes and transfers to study redistribution? This is something also we study. And in each one of these 4 steps, we can identify, or we can impute and include and adjust to get a sense of what taxes and transfers do to the distribution of income in the region. So in step 1, the survey already includes information on monetary transfers, so that's there. And in step 2, to get an idea of income tax rates, we impute effective income tax rates from our income tax records that we have for every country. And we also impute VAT effective rates, but that's using profiles from auxiliary work, so from the Commitment to Equity database, if you're interested to know more. That's where we get the profiles to impute consumption taxes across the distribution. And in step 3, when we're scaling to macro incomes, again, we're scaling to total monetary transfers in the national accounts and to total direct and indirect taxes in the national accounts. And here we arrive at the disposable income of the household sector. And in the 4th step, it's just a matter of imputing, which is no easy matter, of imputing in-kind transfers from the government to households, so education, healthcare, to arrive at the adjusted disposable income of the national economy. And so we have the total spending, in-kind spending of the government in the national accounts, and we allocate this by education, by healthcare, according to the use that each household makes of these services. And this information we also get from Commitment to Equity studies. So check out the Commitment to Equity database. They have studies for many countries in in the region and across the world on incidence of spending and taxes, which are very useful, which is very useful for our interests here. Okay, so that's in a nutshell what we do. So what do we find? Well, let's begin with different types of income and different types of growth. So here I'm showing you 4 different types of growth that we have in our 4 series. So the bottom series, the lighter pink, is the growth of income. So this is average income in Brazil in euros PPP over time. This is the average growth that we see in the raw survey. The next series is when we correct for top incomes in the survey using tax data. Then the third series above that is when we incorporate macro income for the household sector from the system of national accounts. And then finally, the big jump is when we go to impute all the rest to arrive at net national income. Okay, so here you can see not only 4 levels of income, but growth rates seem to be very different across series. So when we say, okay, how does growth affect the distribution? What type of growth do we mean? What type of income are we interested in? Okay, because this can matter a lot, as you can see already from this picture. What about inequality? Well, here's the Gini coefficient for the same 4 series. And as you can see, there's quite a distance, especially in levels, between what is reported in this raw survey, which again was the main data set used to study these questions in the region and much of the world. There's a large gap between what is reported in survey and when we add top incomes from tax data and when we add in macro incomes for the household sector, especially, and a bit from the other sectors. And in terms of trends, you can see that they can also get affected, notably when we're adding in the macro incomes, the missing, so-called missing macro incomes in the final 2 stages. I'll come back to this picture at the end because there's something more going on post 15 that I think should be of interest regarding the the future of the international agenda in reconciling growth and inequality statistics. But Brazil is a case where we see differences in levels. So this is the Gini coefficient. We see, more than a 10 percentage point difference overall. These are very large differences. So again, going back to this, what type of growth are we interested in? What type of income are we interested in? This affects our inequality measurement. Other countries where we have differences in levels and also differences in trends, okay, between the micro series and the macro series are Chile and Mexico, along with Brazil. In other countries, the trends are broadly similar across all series. It's just the levels that change. Okay. Now, what about taxes and transfers? We said this is something else we study. So here we're showing you the incidence of all taxes in the national economy across the percentiles, household percentile groups, and also the incidence of cash transfers. This is the dotted line. And you can see, so you have direct taxes in red on income and wealth, differentiated. You have payroll, so you have income tax, so payroll and income tax in blue, I should say, and you have property tax, wealth taxes in red, and in gray you have value-added taxes, essentially. And the picture that emerges here, and this is consistent across all countries, is that direct taxes are progressive in the sense that the effective tax rate is higher the higher you go up in the distribution, right? So richer households are paying a higher share of their income. They're paying more of the income tax. They're paying more of the property taxes. But it's the middle and the bottom of the distribution that are paying the overwhelming share of indirect taxes or consumption taxes. And this is what makes taxes regressive in Latin America, the value-added taxes, essentially. And you can see the fact that the monetary benefits don't do enough to outweigh this regressive effect of taxes. Of course, monetary benefits are very progressive. They're received by more by the bottom of the distribution than by the top. And this is a picture that gets replicated in other countries to different extents, right? So the profiles are stronger in some countries than others, but it's generally the weight of consumption taxes versus the weight of consumption taxes at the bottom and the middle versus the weight of direct taxes at the top. And the fact that, well, monetary benefits, we're talking about a few percentage points of national income here that is spent on. These are not huge transfers. Other types of transfers are going to matter in a moment, and let me explain. So let me be a bit more clear on what impact each adjustment of our approach has on the Gini coefficient. Okay, so we have raw surveys, right? We can see that I'm taking the average of the 11 countries we have. So the Gini coefficient in the raw surveys is over 0.5, which is quite high. Okay, the raw surveys, I say post-tax because it's post-tax income that's reported in raw surveys generally. Okay, and so the first adjustment we make is that we want to make them pre-tax to compare with the national accounts. So we add the income tax paid back from the tax data, and you can see here the changes in percentage points. This adds just over 1 percentage point to the Gini coefficient. This increases inequality, as you would expect, right? Because income taxes are mainly paid by the top of the distribution. So when you're adding them back in, it's going to increase slightly inequality. So this is what you see in red. Next, what happens when we add top incomes from tax data? This adds about 3.5 to 4 percentage points to the Gini coefficient when we add in top incomes that are badly covered or absent from survey data. So this is quite significant. But even more significant is when we add the macro incomes from the system of national accounts for the household sector. This is adding 5 percentage points to the Gini coefficient. Okay, this is very significant. And so you can see that overall, if we're just interested in the household sector, between the raw survey and the final adjustment, we're adding about already 10 percentage points to the Gini coefficient on average in Latin America. Okay, so these in bold, 8 to 10 percentage points from these three assumptions, of these three adjustments. And the biggest one, the most important one, being the incomes from the household sector in the national accounts. Now, if we go beyond that and add corporate income, so these are the undistributed profits, essentially, of corporations, we're adding 1%, 1.5 percentage points to the Gini, so not much. These don't seem very important compared to household sector macro incomes. And what happens in terms of, if we want to interested in redistribution, so as I said, direct taxes plus monetary transfers, this decreases the Gini. So this decreases inequality. It lowers the Gini by about 3 percentage points. So this is progressive, as we saw. But on average, when we're looking at the incidence of indirect taxes, this adds a 3 percentage points. So this completely counterbalances the progressivity of cash transfers and direct taxes, it seems. Okay, so national disposable income Gini is up in the mid-60s, 0.60s. Now, interestingly, when we add in-kind spending of the government, that is, we allocate education spending and health spending and money to use to households, this decreases the Gini by about 6 percentage points, which is quite significant. So if you're thinking about government redistribution and you believe the assumptions that we're using and they're all detailed in the papers, it seems that in-kind spending is more important than monetary redistribution, essentially because of the regressive effect of indirect taxes and the overall importance of indirect taxes compared to direct taxes in the region. Okay, so yeah, between the raw survey and the national disposable income, these are the differences in the Gini and the disposable income. So just to summarize, what we see from what we're doing is that the region seems to be either more unequal or not as rich in levels. We can see changes in the Gini coefficient by up to 10 percentage points on average. Trends, and this is where a lot of the debate in the literature lies, in trends. Trends change in 3 out of our 11 countries. That's something we can see. But what we do see and what is different from our results is that there is a lot of much greater heterogeneity in inequality trends in the region and overall inequality analysis. Post-2015, inequality seems to be increasing faster in the macro series, something I'll come back to. Direct tax, in terms of redistribution, as I said, direct taxes and cash transfer programs are regressive, but indirect taxes are more regressive, and overall in-kind transfers seem to be more important. Now, just a bit of publicity. All our results are from this week, I think maybe even from today, on this website that's publicly accessible, distribuciones.info, okay, where we have all our results, or not all our series, but most of them. We're going to work to include all of them that is all of them for the different types of income. So at the moment here, you go on and you can explore the different series according to different definitions of income, different units of analysis, different inequality indicators, Gini, income shares. It's only available in Spanish for the moment, or it's only in Spanish for the moment. We plan to also have versions in Portuguese and English forthcoming. Okay, but if you're interested in more, please do check out this website. Now, where does all this leave us regarding the international agenda, and what do we do regarding what we thought we knew about inequality in a very unequal region like Latin America? Well, you know, for a long time, here, and I'm caricaturing a bit, the old homogeneous world. This is a picture of the strong decline for most of these years in these 2 decades that we observe in these countries when we just use surveys. So surveys, this is, when you wanted to know anything about inequality in Latin America, you go to the World Bank's website, you go to ICLAC's website, and the database just reports inequality, income inequality from surveys, okay? Quite homogeneous, quite similar trends, even when you're changing the unit of observation, per capita, individuals, etc. And this old homogeneous world had a narrative which made sense, that the decline in inequality for a large part of these 2 decades was due to improvements in terms of trade and social policy, was due to falls of wage inequality being the principal driver, as much of the literature found, that there was educational upgrading, that there was a reduction in skill and experience premia, there was a reduction in low and informal pay, and that even some studies found that even when you incorporate top incomes from income tax declarations, it doesn't really change the picture much. And so in light of our results, what can we say regarding this old sort of conventional narrative in the homogeneous world, where I said before, the picture seems a lot more heterogeneous when you're confronting different types of data sources and income definitions with each other. So first of all, competing narratives can be affected by the unit of analysis, income definition, and the choice of inequality indicators. Okay, the 3 things that I started off with. Now, in our work, we show that the divergent trends are the results mainly of the contributions of top incomes and capital income, so the capital share. So this is something we find strongly for all countries, that even when wage inequality is falling, diverging trends across series are mainly due to the impact of top incomes when measured properly and capital income, so the capital share from the national accounts. And so basically, therefore, the conventional narrative, everything we knew up till now, the way I would summarize it is that it holds approximately for the bottom 99% of the distribution. So results hold, and especially regarding earnings, the earnings distribution. But once we add in capital and top incomes, where capital is concentrated, things become more complicated. And so when we're thinking about this new international agenda, which is coming online very soon in 2025, a couple of points and I'll finish with these. Trust, the trust that we have in different data sources. What type of income and growth are we interested in? Again, these are research questions that, depending on the answer to these, we will want to use different definitions of income, and therefore we will be using different growth rates, essentially, in the analysis. So that is an important question to ask as users. And in terms of available data and going forward, what improvements can we make to available data that would allow the different data sources to better speak to each other, and for there to be more coherence across data sources, if that's something we want? Well, there's different proposals that we can make. So administrative data could be more compatible with national accounts, or that is national accountants could tell us a bit more how they use and whether they use administrative data when they're aggregating different types of income in the accounts. Surveys could be linked to admin data for the formal population. So this is something very common in developed countries, right? But it's still very uncommon in developing regions like Latin America. So for the formal population, at least surveys could, surveyors could make a better effort at linking admin data for wages, notably, which is the case for some countries in the region, but not all. You could also think about a property registry and a shareholders registry that could also be used to link, especially regarding capital incomes, which would be very useful. And a greater decomposition of the household sector national accounts would also be desirable, because still in many countries, the decomposition is not great, and we have to make certain assumptions, which we would rather not make. And what about changes to existing data sets? So as we go forward with this international agenda, what happens, for example, when estimates prior to the year of a revision, a major revision in a data set, what happens to those prior estimates? And let me just give you one quick example and I'll finish. Case of Brazil, post-2015. So what happens in Brazil post-2015 or around 2015? Well, from the growth figures, and you see this more in the GDP figures and the national accounts figures, there is a crisis. Growth declines in around 2014 in Brazil. Okay, it stagnates and declines. And then what happens when we look at inequality post-15? We seem to see contradictory trends when we're looking at our micro series. So the bottom two series here, survey and surveys plus tax data. And then when we add in the macro data, there seems to be contradictory evidence. And to understand this a bit more, we have to break down the comparison of survey and national accounts and incomes to see, well, what could be going on. And we do see that there's a break in some series, notably capital incomes and social benefits, that could be linked to the divergence in these trends. And what happens in Brazil post-2015? Well, the survey structure completely changes. So they basically have a new structure of a survey. So it's a rolling panel, okay, annually. And questions are improved or are made more precise, specifically questions to better capture non-labor incomes. And this, we think, could be behind the improvement in the coverage of capital incomes in the survey. What's going on with social benefits, pensions? We don't know. But this is explaining essentially why the trends seem to be reverting after you include these macro incomes, basically because you're scaling capital incomes less, which are more concentrated, and you have a higher scaling factor for incomes that are more equally distributed that we know in the distribution, like pensions and social benefits. Okay, but this is just one example. When there are major revisions to one of these underlying data sets, what do we do? And what does the international agenda propose? Do we completely revise the series prior to 2015 so that they are consistent with the break after 2015? This is also a major issue. But still, given the challenges, I do think, and I think my colleagues share the view that it does matter to have macro consistent inequality indicators to better answer important questions, like basic questions like how does economic growth affect the population, the consequences of commodity booms, trade shocks, economic crises, the differences in the effects of the profit share and the wage share when they change, top incomes versus bottom incomes, and how do all government taxes and spending affect inequality. These are stuff we should be interested in and we want to answer. But also, it's useful to enrich macroeconomic theories when we're interested in business cycle fluctuations, and could be useful inputs to current macro models, whether they be Hank, agent based or stock flow consistent models. But in any case, I think it's definitely worthwhile, as we're pursuing this international agenda, to be very mindful of the type of income we're using and to try and be as transparent as possible as regards to the estimation and the publication of different series, as we do here and as we make available on our new website. So this is something that we want to have all the different types of series and indicators available and not prioritize necessarily one over the other. It really depends on the question and the type of income and the type of growth you're interested in. So that's it for me. They're the lessons I think we can draw from this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hey, Marc, thanks so much for your presentation. So now I will open the floor to questions from the audience. All our attendees can use the raise hand function to pose your questions or paste your question into the chat, stating your name and affiliation where possible. We will first take questions from the room.
Thanks. Hi, Marc. This is Paul Segal here. That was great, super interesting. I have many questions. I'll confine them to two or maybe three. First of all, why assume that the system of national accounts is correct? It'd be great if you could tell us a bit more about where those numbers come from. And as you know, there's been a debate for over 20 years on this question, and you certainly haven't always assumed that was the case. Second, in terms of the imputation of the value of government spending, I thought I heard you say two different things. One is you said that, government services, public services. First of all, you said they're attributed proportionally, and then secondly, you said you use the data from the commitment to equity estimates, which are also very different. So, for instance, as you know, commitment to equity will look at surveys to see how many children go to school in a given household in order to impute the value of the benefit of going to school to that household, and that's different from doing it proportionally. And then the third thing is, if you could just confirm, I think you said that you do include disposable household income now as a variable, which in DINA previously you didn't. And could you just confirm that? Because if you are, that's great. I very much applaud you doing that, because that's a very important variable for welfare analyses. Generally, excellent work and super interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I don't know if I can answer now.
Yeah, I can help.
Thank you. So let me start off in reverse order. Disposable income. Yeah, these are series that we are including in this data set, in this database, the website. So yeah, that's an added step. It may be not on now if you go on it, but it's something we want to add. So I should say that this data, a lot of it will be replicated on the World Inequality database, but we're including a lot more information here from the work we're doing. So we're including, you can see choices of different types of indicators, you can do different types of definitions of income and units of observation. Okay, so we're including a lot more information here on this data set, but for the final, shall we say, national income distributional series, it's equivalent to what's on WID. But there's just more information. And we want to include disposable income as a series. So before distributing government services, as you say. Now, government services, we do distribute using the CEQ profiles, not proportionally. What we do distribute proportionally from the government is their factor income. That's proportional in the pre-tax series. But in terms of education and health spending, it's non-proportional. We're using the CEQ profiles to do that. Okay, so that's different from the income that the government gets as factor income. It's capital income from participation in companies, etc. That's for now that's proportional, but not the government services. And maybe a more significant question on the system of national accounts. Yes, I agree completely. It's not that we want to say that they are absolutely flawless. By no means they are, and in a lot of the work we're doing, we can see that the way they're presented can be improved. The details, methodological details behind how they're constructed can be improved. How and whether they're using the micro data that we also use, this information, this level of transparency can be improved. But by no means we think it's necessarily a gold standard. But the international agenda is moving in that way, and we're doing this exercise in parallel and offering these different series. It just gives people a sense, what the different levels and possibly trends could be when we're moving from one series to the other. But here, transparency is important, and that's why in the data set we prioritize to include all series so that the user can choose, which one to plot and download. Well, thanks. That's it's a very good question.
Otherwise, I myself have a question for you, Marc, and it's about, a bit going in the direction of Paul. How does this national account for the informal sector? How is it included? I'm just curious about it.
Yeah, it is significant for the region given the levels of informality. From what I've been able to get access to in terms of information, it seems that the national accountants use the annual household survey to report, to include informal wages in the national accounts. At least that's what they do in Brazil, and I think that's probably the practice elsewhere, if it is a practice elsewhere. But it's that would be my best answer to that question.
Okay.
Is that they're using the surveys, and at least that gives us some comfort, because obviously then the data sets are speaking to each other in some way.
Okay, thanks so much. Javier?
Thanks, Marc. It's Javier. I had a question regarding the incidence of social insurance contributions and personal income tax. So if you show the graph you had for the different countries, first, I wonder whether you take into account affiliation. So the incidence of social insurance contributions or payroll tax, for example, seems quite proportionate across the income distribution, whereas you would expect that at the bottom people who are not affiliated, so mostly the informal, you'll see very little incidence at the bottom of the distribution, right? You'll see higher incidence at the top. First on that, so I don't know whether you account for this. And the second is whether you account for all components of personal income tax. For example, I'm surprised also about the results for Peru. Then if I read correctly, so personal income tax is also proportionate across the distribution, right? The incidence, the blue bar, right?
Yeah, you're pointing to two of the blind spots really of the work, which I'm glad you do, because there's not enough time often in a presentation to go into these details. But we are taking, I mean, more of a bird's eye view of 11 countries. And there are elements where we don't have access to the information we would like. That is, the incidence of social security contributions or payroll tax is still lacking for a number of countries. And so, you know, we try to extrapolate from other years or other countries, or we don't do fine micro simulations for many countries like you could do for an individual country study. And here, the personal income tax in Peru, yeah, there's something strange.
For example, Peru, my guess is in Peru, contrary to other countries, you don't have an exempted tax threshold, meaning that you don't have a band that is at zero tax, right? It starts from 0 to, I don't know, 21,000 per year. It applies, so a tax rate of 8% applies.
Yeah.
But there is a general deduction, very high, so that's 7 units of income tax. So that means that basically your incidence at the bottom is completely wrong. So most people at the bottom will fall into this general deduction. Plus, you have the informal people. So it's kind of worrying to show this, at least, you know, for a country like Peru, where I would say the incidence is not correct. You know.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. In the case of Peru, yeah, we've removed this from previous presentations, and it's stuck on here because it's something we wanted to revise. We did flag before, and so if it's an old graph and it's something we've modified, we've updated, I need to check. But my guess is that we haven't, and we've left it. But that's a very important point. These are
to my last question. I mean, we're improving on lots of things, but you know, you're adjusting the raw survey data, right? So you could actually do proper simulations of social insurance and personal income.
Yeah, sure.
The data, and you'll have a much more precise incidence.
Yeah.
Compared to
So,
tax rate, right?
Yeah, this is absolutely something, and with with help of people who know the data a lot better, this is something that's definitely desirable. We've done it for a few countries, so I've done it for these micro simulations for Brazil, from previous work and from data that I know well, and indeed doing very fine micro simulations using the survey data and characteristics. But it's unfortunately not something we've done for Peru, but we flagged, and that's something definitely to put on the agenda, not only for Peru but for other countries where individual, more detailed studies can improve a lot of these series. And that's, we're always on the lookout for that, and the data, the website will be evolving in that respect. They will get updated, absolutely. But thank you, Javier, for those remarks.
We have something online? No. Okay. Can I go again, Marc? Can you show that table? Okay. This table. Because I mean, these are the point estimates you get after the arrangements and so on. But I was wondering if there's a way to get something like standard errors or something like that. Because in the end, I mean, this process is very complex with different steps and so on. Mm-hmm. But in the end, the last DINI you get, I mean, it's just a point. Is there a way to get that measure of uncertainty about the point estimate?
No, sure. I mean, there's a whole discussion on errors, standard errors, on even total error, as we're mixing and matching these different data sets together. And something we are thinking about even at present, as we're writing guidelines for the UNIGE for the region on these questions. So it's something we're thinking about. But at this stage of the estimates, the standard errors, let's say we haven't directly computed them, or they don't come out. Essentially, I mean, from the survey, it's very easy to do it. But we have a survey that's been reweighted with the universe of tax data, so we're adding in a lot more. So, shall we say, we're changing the weights, and we're adding in the universe of incomes declared at the top. So, I mean, leads us to think we have to think about the question in light of that, and when we're adding in the macro incomes. But yeah, that's something we generally get asked, and we're working on, especially as we're writing these guidelines for CEPAL, to have a greater discussion of total error, not only standard error but total error, as we're mixing these different data sets together.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much.
But that's a very useful point.
Hi, thanks for a great presentation. I just wanted to get some clarification to see if I understood what you're doing when you're matching the data. If you take wage income in the household survey, do you then scale up all of wage income across the household survey by the ratio of total wage income in the national accounts to in the survey? If so, it seems to implicitly assume the misreporting is same across the income distribution. And I'm picking wages because wages, I think, drives most of the inequality across the income distribution. And that may just not at all be the case, and the results may be highly sensitive to that. It's obviously the straightforward thing to do, but if it is an issue, have you got any countries in which you can do better to get a sense of how big an issue it would be? And wages, of course, are key, I guess.
Yeah. So here, I think this is the graph you had in mind, probably. If you look at the blue dots and you see that you compare total wages reported in surveys to wages in the national accounts, you get a ratio of about, what, 70% in the case of Brazil or so. And so this is the scaling factor. So we see wages at the individual level, and we proportionally scale by this factor across the distribution. And yeah, as regards countries where we can do something else or better, there is something we can potentially do, or theoretically do at least, when we're incorporating incomes from administrative data, be they social security contributions, your wages and social security contributions, or incomes in the income tax records, where we, at the reweighting stage of the survey, we could also incorporate the incidence of those incomes in the tax data into the survey to do sort of a conditional reweighting, another condition on the reweighting. And that's something we haven't explored too much yet, because the administrative data, we don't see enough of a breakdown according to wages and property income in admin data for us to do. But that would be something we could do also going forward.
Follow up, very quick. It's fairly traditional in a lot of countries for this big informal sectors to look at consumption. You're looking at broadening. Can you use consumption data to help you think about how the income distribution gap can be differentially reported across the income distribution? Where you have both good consumption data and good income data.
Yeah. Now we do use consumption profiles from the Commitment to Equity database, which use different surveys to our database. They use more of a consumer finances, household budget surveys, I think, for the most part, where consumption is a lot more present. So it would be possible, but you're probably going to be, again, adding in another data set into the mix. But it would definitely be something interesting, and definitely something on the international agenda, as I said, because not only is income going to be distributed, but also consumption and wealth. So they're definitely probably looking at that at the level of the UN and the OECD regards household consumption, distributing, because it all has to be consistent within the accounts, right? The income, consumption, therefore, and the savings. So yeah, that's very relevant.
Thanks so much, Marc. I think we are on time, right? So it's been a pleasure for me to share the events at the end of today. Thanks so much again, Marc, for presenting the seminar, and thank you everyone in the audience for joining us. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.